The weight of 17 billion light-years pressed against the observation deck like a physical thing, and Dr. Amara Nwosu had long since stopped pretending she could bear it gracefully. She stood at the forward viewport of the Cassina Leibniz, her reflection a ghost layered over the stars, and watched the object that had no business existing do precisely that, exist, perfectly, impossibly, in the cold nothing at the boundary of everything. 3 weeks since their long-range sensors had first caught its signature. 3 weeks of faster-than-light corrections, of rerouted trajectories, of bureaucratic arguments with the Interstellar Science Consortium back on New Nairobi. 3 weeks of watching the data packets arrive and feeling her understanding of physics quietly disassemble itself, the way a cathedral might come apart if you removed one load-bearing stone near the foundation and then stood back to see what happened next. The object was a dodecahedron. Not approximately. Not loosely, the way nature sometimes produces shapes that gesture toward geometry before losing interest. It was a perfect regular dodecahedron, 12 pentagonal faces of equal area, meeting at angles so precise that the Cassina Leibniz measurement array had returned the same figure 17,000 times without a single deviation, 116.565 degrees. Always. The kind of precision that required not engineering but intention. It was 3,471 kilometers in diameter. The size of Earth's moon, approximately. The color of nothing, not black, which is still a color, still the presence of something, but a shade that seemed to occupy an earlier category, predating the distinction between light and its absence. And it pulsed. A slow, rhythmic emanation from every face simultaneously, a frequency that the ship's instruments identified and then failed to classify, returning only an error code that Amara had never seen before in 22 years of deep space research, signature outside model parameters. She had printed that error code and taped it to the wall above her bunk. She wasn't sure why. Something about it felt like an honest statement about where they all now stood. "You're doing it again," said a voice behind her. She didn't turn. She knew the voice, knew it by its particular quality of warmth threaded through with a wire of perpetual worry. Dr. Jomo Osei, her deputy, had been her partner in the field for 11 years. He had the face of a man who had once been very optimistic and was still, against all available evidence, trying to recover that state. "Doing what?" she said. "Standing there like you're trying to memorize it. Like if you look long enough you'll understand it just by looking. That's how science works. That's how contemplation works. Science involves instruments and hypotheses and usually at least one argument about methodology." He came to stand beside her, close enough that she could see his reflection join hers in the viewport. 2 African scientists at the edge of creation, staring at something older than the concept of a creator. "The team is assembled. We're ready for the first approach briefing." "I know. Amara. I know, Jomo. Give me 1 more minute." He gave her 3, and said nothing during them, which was one of the reasons she had worked with him for 11 years. The briefing room of the Cassina Leibniz sat 12, and all 12 seats were filled when Amara entered. She read the room in the time it took her to walk from the door to the head of the table. Dr. Fatima Rostami, chief physicist, was running calculations on her tablet with the focused intensity of someone trying to outpace her own fear. Dr. Henrik Voss, xenoarchaeology and structural analysis, had the rigid posture of barely contained excitement. He had spent 30 years studying artificial structures and had never found one that wasn't made by humans. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Okafor, their military liaison from the consortium, sat with her hands folded on the table and her expression professionally neutral, which Amara had learned meant she was in active communication with someone far away and far above them all. The remaining 8, physicists, engineers, a linguist named Dr. Priya Mehta who had been added to the team on the theory that something that size might want to communicate, occupied a spectrum between controlled anxiety and barely suppressed wonder. She laid her palms flat on the table. Felt its solidity. Appreciated it. "What we know," she said, without preamble, because preamble was for situations where uncertainty needed padding and this situation did not need any more uncertainty than it already had. "The object is artificial. The geometric precision eliminates any natural explanation. I've seen the modeling, I've reviewed the chaos simulations, there is no physical process that produces a structure of this size to these tolerances. It is made. Someone made it." She paused to let that settle. Several people already knew it. Saying it aloud in a room together was different from knowing it. "The energy signature is unlike anything in our databases." Dr. Rostami. Fatima looked up. She had dark circles under her eyes. Amara suspected everyone did. "It's not any form of radiation we recognize. It's not thermal, not electromagnetic in any standard band, not gravitational in any conventional sense. The best I can do is call it a standing wave in a substrate we haven't characterized. It's as if, she paused, visibly uncomfortable with the sentence she was about to finish, it's as if the physics inside or around the object are operating on a slightly different rule set than the physics we're standing in. How different? Asked Henrik. Different enough that our models return nonsense when we try to apply them to the readings. Same enough that the object is still there, still occupying space, still subject to something like gravity. It's not in another dimension. It's just adjacent. Running parallel to the physics we know, touching it at certain points. Like a harmony, said Priyameta, surprising everyone. She was small and quiet and had spent the entire journey from New Nairobi reading texts on xenolinguistic theory, and this was the first time she had spoken in a group setting. A second melody in a different key that shares some notes with the first. Fatima looked at her for a moment. That's actually not a terrible analogy. What about entry? Said Sarah Okafor. Her voice was flat and professional. The consortium will want to know about entry options. There is an entry option, said Amara. 1. A seam along the junction of three faces on the object's southern hemisphere. Using southern loosely, I mean the hemisphere currently facing away from the galactic plane. The seam is 4.7 meters wide at its widest point and runs for approximately 60 meters. It reads as a structural gap rather than a material seam. In plain terms, it is a door. A door left open, said Jomo. A door left open, Amara confirmed. The silence that followed lasted 4 seconds. Amara counted them. We go in, she said. Probe first, then a human team. 4-person maximum, full environmental suits, tethered to the ship. I lead the human team. Jomo, Fatima, and Dr. Mehta with me. Henrik coordinates external monitoring. She saw Henrik's jaw tighten and addressed him directly. I need your eyes on the outside. If something goes wrong in there, you are the person most qualified to figure out why from the data. Henrik looked like he wanted to argue. Instead he nodded once, slowly, with the dignity of a man swallowing something large. Lieutenant Commander Okafor, Amara said, what is the consortium's position? Sarah met her gaze. Observe, document, do not interfere with any active systems. Standard Protocol 7. I understand the protocol. I'm reminding you that I'm required to enforce it. The two women looked at each other. There was an entire conversation in that exchange, happening below the verbal level, in the grammar of two people who had been civil to each other for 3 weeks and were now testing the load-bearing capacity of that civility. Noted, said Amara. The probe went in 12 hours later and transmitted for 19 minutes before its signal cut out. Not interference, the transmission just stopped, the way a sentence stops when the speaker decides mid-word that they have said enough. In 19 minutes it had captured enough data to reshape everything they thought they knew, and those 19 minutes of footage became the most watched, most analyzed, most argued over recording in the history of human space exploration. The interior of the dodecahedron was not hollow in the way that a shell is hollow. It was hollow in the way that a cathedral is hollow, hollow with deliberate, structural, meaningful emptiness, the space serving an architectural purpose, the absence itself being part of the design. The interior surface was covered in a material that responded to the probe's lights by producing its own, a soft luminescence that rose and fell in patterns too regular to be coincidental and too complex to be decoded in 19 minutes. Along every face, at regular intervals, structures rose from the surface like organs, not quite columns, not quite pillars, more like the internal architecture of a very large, very slow machine that had been running for a very long time and had developed, through use, something resembling anatomy. At the center of the interior, visible from every angle because the space was vast enough to hold it and because it seemed to want to be seen, was a single platform. Circular. Elevated perhaps 30 meters above the general interior surface. Reached by 12 ramps, one from each face, in a radial arrangement that Priya, watching the footage, immediately said reminded her of something. When pressed she said she didn't know what. When pressed harder she said it reminded her of an altar, and then looked uncomfortable about having said it. On the platform was a mechanism. The probe's cameras had not been good enough to resolve the details before the signal cut. But they had been good enough to see that it was there, that it was made of the same unclassifiable material as everything else, and that it was, unmistakably, a control interface. It wants us to come to it, said Fatima, during the 12-hour period of analysis before the human entry team suited up. Machines don't want, said Amara. This one might. Amara did not answer that, because she didn't have a good answer and she had made it a professional practice, over 22 years, never to respond to good questions with bad answers just to fill the silence. She slept for 3 hours before suiting up. She dreamed of her mother's kitchen in Lagos, the smell of egusi soup on a Thursday evening, the sound of a football match from the next room, the specific weight of being 9 years old and having no decisions larger than whether to do homework before or after dinner. She woke up with the dream's warmth still on her like a second skin, and then the waking world reasserted itself, and she lay in the dark for a moment holding both things, the warmth and the weight, before getting up. The 4 of them were quiet in the shuttle, crossing the 340 kilometers between the Cascina Leibniz and the object's entry point. The dodecahedron filled the viewport entirely now, no longer a shape against space but a space unto itself, a context, a territory. The pulsing was visible to the naked eye at this range, slow, patient, the rhythm of something that had been running for a very long time and had learned not to be in a hurry. The door was exactly as the probe had showed it. 60 meters of structural gap, wide enough for 2 people abreast in full suits. The material at its edges was worn. Amara noticed this as she floated through, running a gloved hand along the surface, worn in the way that stone steps are worn by centuries of feet, a smoothing and a polishing that was the physical record of passage. Many passages. Many times, this door had been used. The luminescence inside rose to meet them. Not aggressively. Not like an alarm or a detection system activating. More like a house's lights coming on when someone comes home, a responsive warmth, an accommodation of presence. The patterns on the walls shifted subtly as the 4 of them moved through the interior, clusters of light gathering near them and dispersing ahead, as if the building itself were paying attention. "Are you seeing the wall patterns?" Jomo asked, his voice compressed by the suit's communication system into something that sounded more like himself than usual, more private. "I'm seeing them," said Priya. She had her recorder running, capturing everything, her head moving constantly to track the shifting light. "They're not random. There's a grammar to it. Not language, not yet, but grammar. Rules about which patterns can follow which patterns. Can you read it?" "Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I can tell you it's organized. Whatever this is, it's organized." The ramp to the central platform was a gentle incline, wide enough and smooth enough that it barely registered as a climb. Amara led. She was aware of her own heartbeat with unusual clarity, not racing, just present, asserting itself, reminding her of its existence with a deliberateness it didn't usually bother with. She had been afraid before, in the field. She had been in genuine physical danger on the ice sheets of Kepler 442b, had been within hours of death by oxygen deprivation on the research station accident of 2287. This was not that kind of fear. This was a larger, quieter variety. The fear of standing at a threshold not of danger but of significance. The platform was larger than it had appeared in the probe footage, perhaps because the probe had only approximated its scale against the surrounding emptiness, and now there were 4 human bodies to serve as a real scale reference. It was perhaps the size of a city block, circular, and its surface was covered in what Amara could only describe as text. Not text she could read, but text in the sense that mattered for the definition, marks made by an intelligence to carry information from one mind to another across time. Mark after mark after mark, in a script that was unlike any human writing system and yet carried the immediate, unmistakable quality of writing, the density, the variation, the sense of meaning held in an encoding. The mechanism at the center of the platform was about the size of a car. It rose from the platform surface in a shape that Amara did not have a word for, not quite a column, not quite a console, not quite a sculpture, but borrowing something from each. Its surface was divided into regions, some smooth, some covered in the same script as the platform floor. At its center, at a height that would have been comfortable for a human being to reach while standing, was a recessed area roughly the size and shape of 2 human hands placed side by side. Amara stood in front of it and did not touch it. "I need readings on everything," she said. "Material composition, energy output, any changes in the interior environment since we arrived." The next 40 minutes were science in its purest form, systematic, careful, conducted in the presence of something vast and strange, the instruments moving over surfaces with the patience of people who knew that patience was the only tool adequate to the moment. Fatima ran her sensors in overlapping passes. Jomo documented the script on the platform surface with photographic precision. Priya walked the perimeter of the platform and spoke in a low continuous murmur into her recorder, making observations, asking questions aloud that she did not expect answers to and received anyway, in the form of the wall patterns subtly reorganizing themselves each time she spoke. Amara watched all of this. And then she turned back to the central mechanism, and she studied it. And after a while she began to read. Not the script, not all of it, not then. But the mechanism itself was a kind of language, and she had spent 22 years learning to read things by their structure, and the structure here was saying something she could almost hear. There was an interface. The recessed hand shape was an interface. There was an activation sequence of some kind. She could see, in the arrangement of the marked regions around the central recess, the logic of an input protocol, a series of steps designed to be followed. There was a log. She recognized it as a log because it had the formal structure of recorded events, the same visual grammar as any database she had ever seen, the syntax of this, then this, then this. And the log was long. She called Fatima over. "Tell me what you see in this section." Fatima stood beside her and looked. Was quiet for a moment. Then, "It's a record of events. Time-stamped. The timestamps are in a unit I don't recognize, but they increase. There are," she counted, "there are 47 entries." "What kind of events?" Fatima ran her scanner slowly over the section. The scanner returned data that required interpretation, and the interpretation took time, and the time felt very loud. "Large-scale energy events," Fatima finally said. "Very large scale. Each entry records an event of the same category, but the magnitude increases from entry to entry." She paused. "Amara, the magnitude of the most recent entry. If I'm reading this correctly, the energy involved is," another pause, longer, "it's cosmological. It's the order of magnitude of a Big Bang." The word hung between them in the luminescent air. "And the entry before that?" Amara asked, though she already knew, or believed she knew, and wanted to hear it said aloud by someone else first. "Same. And the one before?" "All 47 entries." Fatima lowered the scanner. Her voice was very steady, the voice of a physicist falling back on the bedrock of professional composure because the alternative was to stop functioning. "Each entry is a Big Bang. A universe. This machine has..." She couldn't finish it. "Records of 47 previous universes," Amara finished for her. They looked at each other. "We are," Jomo said, from somewhere behind them, and Amara turned to find him standing 3 meters away, having heard everything, his face a complex territory she had never quite seen on him before, "in the 48th. "In the 48th, Amara said. "Yes." The silence in the machine was the loudest thing Amara had ever heard. It was Priya who said, in a voice entirely unlike her usual quiet precision, "Why is it still running? If it's designed to, if it resets universes, why hasn't it?" She stopped. "The activation sequence," Amara said. She was looking at the recessed hand shape. "It requires an input. The machine runs, it reaches operational readiness, but it will not fire without the activation sequence being entered. And the activation sequence," she moved her scanner across the regions around the recess, reading what she could from the structural logic, "requires a being with free will." "How can a machine require free will?" Henrik's voice, from the earpiece, he was still on the ship, monitoring, watching through their suit cameras. "How would it even test for that?" "I don't know," Amara said. "But look at the design." She gestured for their suit cameras to pan across the full mechanism. This was built by something that understood the concept, that considered it significant enough to make it a prerequisite. They didn't want a machine pressing this button. They wanted a conscious choice. "Whose choice?" said Sarah Okafor's voice, from the ship. The question filled the space. Amara walked to the edge of the platform and looked out at the interior of the machine, at the vast luminescent faces, the structural formations like ribs, the patterns of light moving in their ancient grammar across surfaces that had been here before the sun was born. Before any sun. Before stars existed to arrange themselves into galaxies. Before, perhaps, the concept of before had fully committed to its own definition. 47 universes. 47 Big Bangs, each recorded in a log kept by a machine that had been present for all of them, that had in fact caused all of them. And the current universe, the 48th, was, by the machine's own record, overdue. The timestamps told a story. Each universe had lasted longer than the previous one, the intervals growing, the machine's patience expanding across each cosmic epoch. And the current interval had exceeded the projected duration. The machine had been waiting. Was waiting. Would wait for as long as it took, or until someone with free will came and decided what happened next. "We need to go back to the ship," Amara said. "Amara," Jomo started. "Not permanently. To think. To talk. To actually think, not to react." She looked at him, and at Fatima, and at Priya. "We are not making any decision today. Is that understood?" Nobody objected. They didn't have the vocabulary yet for the objection they would eventually raise. The shuttle ride back was silent. The silence had a different quality now. not the tense anticipation of going in, but the altered density of people who have encountered something that has reorganized the internal architecture of their worldview and are trying to find the new walls. Amara went to her cabin and sat on the edge of her bunk and did not move for 1 hour and 11 minutes. She thought about her daughter, Kyoma, who was 14 and brilliant and had her father's laugh and was right now, in the time frame that mattered, on New Nairobi, probably doing her mathematics homework or complaining about it, probably eating something and complaining about that too, probably alive and specific and actual in all the ways that mattered. Kyoma had once asked her mother, at age 7, if the stars would ever go out. And Amara had explained stellar evolution, red giant phases, heat-death timescales, all the beautiful and brutal physics of a universe winding down on its own terms. And Kyoma had listened very carefully and then said, "But not yet, right? Not for a very long time." And Amara had said, "Not for a very long time. You'll have your whole life and a trillion more years after that." And Kyoma had nodded, satisfied, and gone back to whatever she had been doing. Amara thought about that for a long time. Then she called a full team meeting, all 12, plus Okafor, and told them everything. The fracturing, when it came, was not dramatic. It came in the way that fault lines actually move, not in the single earthquake of the imagination, but in the long, slow, grinding pressure that precedes it, the gradual separation that happens long before the visible break. Henrik was the first to state a position. He did it that evening, in the briefing room, with the map of the object's interior on the main display and his hands flat on the table, in the same posture Amara habitually used, which she suspected was not coincidental. "We activate it," he said. "That's why we're here. That's what it's for. Every previous universe lasted longer than the last. That's a progression. That's improvement. Whatever the machine is doing, it's getting better at it. This universe is overdue. The machine is waiting. We are the beings with free will that it has been waiting for. The only ethical choice is to do what we were brought here to do." "We weren't brought here," Jomo said, carefully. "We came here." The distinction may not be meaningful. It is profoundly meaningful. "Henrik," said Amara, "who do you think built this?" He met her eyes. "Something that understood physics better than we do. Something that understood time better than we do. And they built a machine to keep improving things. Keep extending the experiment. Keep making each iteration longer, more complex, more something. We don't know what the metric is. But there is a metric, and by that metric, things are getting better. At the cost of everything that exists," said Fatima. "Which will exist again. In a better version. Not the same things. Not," Fatima stopped. Her voice had acquired a roughness. "Not my children. My children won't exist in the next universe. No one's children will. Everything, everyone, everything we've ever loved and lost and built and burned and saved, every act of kindness and every terrible mistake, every war and every poem and every meal someone cooked for someone they loved," she stopped again. Collected herself. "All of it goes. A reset is not an improvement for the things being reset. The next universe's inhabitants won't know the difference. That is not the defense you think it is, Henrik." Sarah Okafor, who had been silent through all of this, spoke without looking up from the table. "The consortium's position, if I'm reporting it accurately, will be that no action should be taken without full consultation with humanity's governing bodies. The decision, if a decision is to be made, does not belong to this team." "The machine disagrees," said Amara. Sarah looked up. "What?" "The machine requires free will. The free will of the being in front of it. It's not asking for a committee. It's asking for a person. A person who has stood in front of it and understood what it is and makes a choice." She paused. "The machine's designers understood something about free will that suggests they understood something about consciousness. They didn't want a delegate. They wanted a genuine agent." "That," said Sarah, in a tone that was perfectly controlled, "is your interpretation." "Yes," said Amara. "It is." The argument continued for 6 hours and then resumed the next morning and continued for 2 more days, and by the end of it the fault lines were visible. Henrik on one side, committed to activation with the certainty of a man who had waited 30 years for something to be genuinely, unambiguously, cosmically important and was not going to let the moment pass. Fatima on another side, opposed with an intensity that surprised even Amara. Fatima, who was always precise and measured, had discovered somewhere in the data and the memory of her children's faces that she possessed convictions, and they were strong. Jomo was where he usually was, which was beside Amara, and what this meant was that he was trying to hold space for every position simultaneously, which was both his greatest virtue and the thing that occasionally made her want to shake him. Priya had gone quiet in a way that meant she was working on something privately, a linguistic or structural insight she wasn't ready to share. The rest of the team fragmented along predictable lines, the younger scientists toward caution, the older ones divided between awe-driven acceptance and ethical horror. And Sarah Okafor was on a channel to the consortium, 18 hours a day, transmitting data that Amara was not privy to and receiving instructions she reported selectively. On the fourth day, Amara went back into the machine alone. She told Jomo she was doing a solo survey for additional documentation. She told herself the same thing. Both of them probably believed it about as much as it deserved to be believed, which was not quite at all. The machine received her the same way it had received them collectively, the luminescence rising, the patterns on the walls shifting toward her like a slow tide. She climbed the ramp to the central platform and stood in front of the mechanism and read the log again, more carefully this time. She had printed Fatima's translation and brought it with her, the 47 entries laid out on paper in the suit's pocket, and she read each one. Entry 1. A universe that lasted the equivalent of what she estimated, from the energy scales involved, to be a few billion years. Smaller than theirs. Less complex. The timestamps unit, which she had taken to calling a beat in the absence of a better term, was short. Entry by entry the durations grew. By the 30-something entry, the universes were lasting what she calculated to be roughly the equivalent of her own universe's age. By the 45th and 46th, they were longer. And the 47th, the universe immediately preceding her own, had lasted significantly longer than the oldest estimates for her own universe's maximum age. Which meant that either the trend had reversed, that her universe, the 48th, was shorter than the 47th, or that the trend continued and her universe, though overdue, was still within a natural upper bound she couldn't calculate. Or that the machine's designers had made an error. She had been standing there for perhaps 40 minutes when the thing happened that she had, at some level she would not have admitted to, been waiting for. The patterns on the walls changed. Not their usual shifting, the slow grammar of light. They changed deliberately, a reconfiguration that spread from one face to the next around the entire interior of the machine, and when it settled, every face showed the same pattern. A simple symbol that Priya had identified in her initial analysis as the closest thing in the machine's language to what she called a directional, something that functions across writing systems as a pointer, an imperative, an arrow. Every face. All 12. All pointing inward. All pointing to the center. All pointing to Amara. She stood very still. "I know," she said, out loud, to the machine or to whatever the machine represented. "I know what you're waiting for." The patterns pulsed once, a single collective pulse across all 12 faces, and returned to their normal state. She looked at the mechanism. At the recessed hand shape. At the logic of the activation sequence visible in the marked regions around it. She looked at it for a long time. Then she did something that was not in any protocol and was not what anyone would have predicted. She sat down on the platform floor, cross-legged, in her environmental suit, and she began to actually think. Not react. Not perform deliberation for an audience. Not try to reach a predetermined conclusion through the motions of reasoning. She thought the way she had thought, once, at age 23, sitting in a university library at 3 a.m. before her doctoral defense, when she had for the first time genuinely understood something about the physics she was studying and had sat with it for 2 hours just to feel the shape of the understanding. She thought about the 47 universes and what they represented. Not just cosmologically, she knew that story, she had been living in that story for 4 days and it had not gotten smaller with familiarity. She thought about what the existence of this machine said about the beings who had built it. They had existed in some prior universe. They had developed intelligence and science and the capacity to build something that operated across universal resets. They had faced this same question, reset or don't reset. And they had built a machine that did reset, that kept resetting, that kept a log of every reset, and that required a conscious choice each time. Why require the choice? If they had wanted the machine to run automatically, it could have been built to run automatically. They had clearly had the engineering capacity. The free will requirement was not a technical limitation. It was a design decision. It was a statement. We believe the decision matters. We believe the being making it matters. We do not want this to happen without a mind behind it. She turned that over for a long time. And then she thought about what she had not allowed herself to think about directly, which was the question of what the machine was actually for. Not what it did, she knew what it did. But for what purpose? The designers had run 47 universes, each longer than the last. This was a progression. Henrik was right about that. But a progression toward what? Every universe reset meant everything in it was gone. Every intelligence that had developed, every relationship, every word anyone had ever said to anyone they loved, gone. But the next universe was more complex, more expansive, more whatever the metric was. What was the metric? She looked at the log. Read it again. And this time she noticed something she had not noticed before, or had noticed without registering its significance. After each entry's record of the cosmological event itself, the reset, there was a secondary notation. Smaller. Different in character from the main entry. A footnote, or something functioning as a footnote. She couldn't read the script. But she could read the structure. And the structure of the footnote was the same in every entry. The same 3 symbols. She photographed each one and lined them up on her tablet and stared at them. 3 symbols, repeated 47 times, always in the same order, always as a postscript to the record of a universal destruction and rebirth. She transmitted the images to Priya. 15 minutes later, Priya's voice came through the earpiece. You went back in alone, didn't you? Can you read them? A silence. Then, I can't read them. But I can identify them functionally by their context and their structural relationship to the rest of the entries. The first one appears in several other contexts in the wall patterns. I've been cataloging it, and it consistently appears at the conclusion of what look like complex logical sequences. A resolution symbol. The second is harder, but I think it's what I've been calling the directional, but used in a past tense construction, or what I think is past tense. Moved toward. Or arrived at. The third, she stopped. Priya. The third appears only once in the wall patterns. Once, on the east face, near what looks like a foundational inscription. And when it appears there, it appears in the company of other symbols that I've been reading, tentatively, as concepts around another pause, around awareness. Or witnessing. The capacity to observe one's own existence. Amara was quiet for a moment. The machine's designers. At the end of every universe, in the footnote of every reset, they wrote, resolution, arrived at, awareness. That's my best reading. They were trying to make something that could become aware of itself. Each universe was an iteration. Each reset was a refinement. The goal was a universe complex enough, long-lasting enough, to produce consciousness that understood its own situation. And then what? Said Priya. What happens when you make that? When the universe produces a being that understands its own situation, that stands in front of this machine and knows what it is? I think, said Amara, very slowly, that's the question the machine's designers couldn't answer from inside their own universe. So they built something that would keep trying until the answer revealed itself. She looked at the mechanism. At the recessed hand shape. At the activation sequence. And now it has, Priya said quietly. Amara stood up. Her knees ached, even in low gravity. An hour of sitting cross-legged in an environmental suit was not comfortable. She walked to the mechanism and stood in front of it and put her hands on her sides and breathed. The thing she had been turning over, the shape she had been trying to find the edges of, came clear. The machine was designed to restart the universe. It had done this 47 times. Each time it had required the choice of a conscious being. And what that meant, what the design meant, was that the machine's function was not just to create new universes. Its function was to create universes that could produce a consciousness capable of saying no. Or yes. Or something else. She touched the mechanism's surface with one gloved hand. Not the hand recess. Just the surface. She felt, or believed she felt, a change in the pulsing, a fractional quickening, an attention. I hear you, she said. I understand what you're asking. She walked around the mechanism slowly, looking at the marked regions, the input protocol she had been reading and rereading. She had been thinking of the activation sequence as a binary. Enter it and the universe resets. Don't enter it and the universe continues until its natural end. But the structural logic of the mechanism had bothered her from the first moment she had read it, and she had not known why until now. It wasn't binary. The activation sequence was not on, off. It was a language. A protocol with multiple potential inputs. She had assumed the only valid input was the full activation sequence because that was the only purpose she had been thinking about, but the protocol structure allowed for, she worked through it carefully, at least 3 distinct input types. The full sequence. An interruption. And something she had no word for in English, a construction that the marked regions around the recess seemed to be offering as an alternative the way a menu offers alternatives. A third option. She felt something move through her that was not quite joy and not quite terror and was perhaps what people meant when they talked about the moments in their lives when things became permanently different. She called Jomo. "I need the whole team back in here," she said. "Including Henrik. Especially Henrik. And Okafor. What did you find?" "I found what the machine is actually asking," she said. "And I think I found an answer the designers anticipated but couldn't give themselves." It took 4 hours to get everyone suited up and through the entry point and assembled on the central platform. Amara spent part of that time working with Priya via radio, building a reading of the third input option that they were both confident in by the time everyone arrived. She spent part of it standing at the edge of the platform looking out at the machine's interior and feeling, with a clarity she rarely achieved, the specific weight and texture of being alive at a particular moment. She thought about Kyoma, about the mathematical homework and the complaining and the laugh that was her father's laugh, about the 14 years of accumulated specificity that constituted a human being and could not be reconstructed from any blueprint, no matter how sophisticated the machine. She thought about the 47th universe, long, complex, whatever it had contained, ended here, in this place, when its being with free will had presumably pressed the full activation sequence and the machine had done what it was built to do. She thought about what that being might have been like. Whether they had stood here as she was standing, in a suit or without one, with lungs or without, and felt the same vertigo. She thought about the footnote. Resolution. Arrived at. Awareness. And she thought, we have arrived. When everyone was assembled, 12 scientists, 1 military liaison, all of them standing on the platform of a machine older than the universe in environmental suits, their helmet lights creating a small collective illumination in the vast luminescent space, Amara stood in front of the mechanism and spoke. She told them what she had found. The 3 input types. The third option. She told them Priya's reading of the footnotes. She told them what she believed the designers had been trying to create and why. She told them slowly and clearly and without drama, the way you tell people things when the thing itself is dramatic enough and does not need your help. When she finished, Henrik was the first to speak. "You're guessing," he said. "Not unkindly. I am making an inference from evidence," she said. "Which is all any of us have ever done. If you're wrong about the third option." "If I'm wrong about the third option, I will have entered an unintended input into an alien machine of cosmological power, and we will have to see what happens." "Yes." She met his eyes. "That is the situation." "What is the third option?" asked Fatima. "Specifically." "The activation sequence enters the reset. The interruption, the second option, appears to halt the machine permanently. It reads as a kill sequence, a full shutdown. Neither of those is what I'm proposing." She looked at all of them. "The third option is an amendment. A modification to the next cycle's parameters. It's an input that says, in the machine's language, this universe is not finished. Can you prove that reading?" Sarah asked. "No," Amara said. "I cannot prove it." The silence was different this time from the earlier silences. It had a quality of balance to it, a held breath quality, as if the machine itself was listening. "The designers," Amara continued, "built a machine that ran 47 iterations trying to produce a consciousness that understood its own situation. And they built the machine to accept 3 kinds of input from that consciousness: yes, no, and not yet. Because they understood that a consciousness that truly understood its situation would need the option to say that. Not reset everything and not end everything but keep going. The experiment is not over. We are not finished becoming what you were trying to make." She looked at Henrik. "You said activating it is the ethical choice because the next universe will be better. I don't disagree that the machine intends improvement. But I think you've misidentified where the improvement is happening. It's not in the universe being reset and rebuilt to longer tolerances. The improvement is in this, in what we're doing right now. In a consciousness standing in front of this machine and saying, I understand what I am, I understand what this is, I understand the history of everything, and I am making a free choice." "And your free choice is to delay," Henrik said. "My free choice is to say that delay is not the right word. The machine is waiting for a being that has reached a certain kind of awareness. And the awareness it was waiting for is not just understanding the mechanism. It's understanding the full question. Which includes understanding that you don't have to answer it the way it was designed to be answered. That you can find the option the designers couldn't use themselves, because the designers were inside their own universe, and this option requires standing outside your assumptions about what the machine is for." She turned to the mechanism. Her hands were very steady. "I'm going to use the third option," she said. "Anyone who wants to stop me has about 30 seconds. Nobody stopped her. Fatima said, "I trust you." Jomo said nothing, which was also trust, and she recognized it as such. Henrik looked at the mechanism for a long moment. Then he looked at Amara. Something moved across his face, complicated, multiple things at once, and what finally settled there was not the certainty he had arrived with, but something older and stranger than certainty, something that looked, if you knew Henrik Voss, like humility. "Do it," he said. Sarah Okafor said, very quietly, "The consortium will have questions." "I know," said Amara. "So will I. That's the point." She placed her hands in the recessed area. It was precisely the right size. The suit's haptic feedback conveyed pressure, resistance, a surface that was neither warm nor cold but somehow registered as both. She read the input protocol one more time, in her head, the sequence of regions she needed to engage. And she entered the third option. She engaged the first region. Light spread from the point of contact in a slow radial wave. She engaged the second. The pulse of the machine, that ancient rhythm she had been hearing for 3 weeks, shifted, a change in its fundamental cadence, like a musician changing time signature in the middle of a piece they have played 10,000 times. She engaged the third region. The fourth. The fifth. The patterns on all 12 faces reorganized simultaneously. She engaged the sixth region, and the central mechanism began to produce its own light, not the luminescence of the walls but a harder, more specific light, directional, emanating from the marked regions around her hands in a sequence that responded to her inputs, acknowledging them, incorporating them. The seventh. The eighth. The walls were doing something new. The grammar of their light patterns was changing at a rate that Priya, behind her, was murmuring about in a low continuous voice, and the murmur had the quality of someone who has finally understood the language they have been studying and is hearing it spoken fluently for the first time. The ninth region. The 10th. The pulsing of the machine reached a frequency she felt in her chest through the suit. The 11th. She paused. Not because she was uncertain, but because she wanted to be present in the pause. Because 47 universes had preceded this one and their beings with free will had stood in front of the mechanism and made their choices, and she was the 48th, and she wanted to take one moment to carry all of them with her. The failed ones and the longer ones and the one that had lasted a cosmological epoch, all of them reaching forward through their ending to arrive here, at this pause, at this breath. "I see you," she thought. "All of you. I see what you were trying to do. And I'm telling the machine, the trying is the point. The reaching is the point. Keep the trying going." She engaged the 12th region. The machine did not make a sound. It was not dramatic in any way that would have satisfied a film director. The light changed, deepened, then simplified, then returned to its previous state, and the pulsing smoothed into a longer, slower rhythm, and the mechanism released her hands with a gentle resistance, like something that had been holding on and was now letting go. And then it was quiet. The good quiet, the quiet of something that has been wound to its purpose and is now running at it, smoothly, without friction. Amara stepped back. Her knees were shaking slightly. She hadn't known they were until she took the step. "What happened?" Henrik asked. His voice was rough. "I don't know exactly," she said. I think the machine accepted the input. I think it has registered that this universe's consciousness has made the third choice. And I think that information is now part of the log." "Entry 48, said Jomo. "Entry 48. She looked at the log section of the mechanism. A new notation was visible at the end of the record. Recent. She could see that it was recent in the way that ink drying on a page is recent. A new entry. The 48 magnitudes of cosmological events and the new addition at the end, and in the postscript position, where every previous entry had written resolution, arrived at awareness. The 3 symbols were there, all 3, and following them, for the first time in the log, a 4th. Priya came to stand beside her. Stared at it. "That symbol," she said. "I've seen that symbol. It appears in the wall patterns when 2 grammatical structures are joined. Not just sequentially. Causally. When one thing becomes another thing because of the action of the second thing on the first." She stopped. "It's a continuation symbol," Amara said. "It's a therefore," said Priya. "It's the machine saying, and therefore," she stopped again. Looked at Amara. And then nothing. An incomplete sentence. The machine registered the choice but doesn't know what comes next. "Nobody does," said Amara. "That's the point." She stood in the machine that was older than everything she had ever known, surrounded by the people she had brought here, and she felt the specific and unrepeatable weight of being a particular person at a particular moment. Amara Nwosu, physicist, born in Lagos, mother of Kyoma, standing at the end of the universe's expected lifespan and having chosen, on behalf of everyone who had ever lived and everyone who had not yet been born, to keep the door open a little longer. She did not know if she had chosen correctly. She knew that she had chosen honestly, with full understanding, with a specific quality of free will that the machine's designers had apparently spent 47 universes trying to cultivate. She knew that the universe would continue. For how long she had no idea, whether the machine would return to neutral and wait for another being in another million years, or whether her input had made some more permanent change in its operational parameters, she did not know and might never know. She knew that Kyoma would do her mathematics homework tonight, and complain about it, and that the universe would continue to contain this specific complaint, this specific laugh, this specific and irreplaceable accumulation of being alive. She knew that whatever came next, for her, for the team, for the extraordinary bureaucratic and philosophical reckoning that awaited them when they returned to a humanity that was about to learn it was living in the 48th iteration of a cosmic experiment, whatever came next would be earned. Would carry the weight of the choice that had been made here. Would be the continuation of something rather than the interruption of it. She took one last look at the central mechanism. At the log, with its 48 entries and its incomplete final sentence. At the walls, with their ancient grammar running through patterns that Priya would spend the rest of her career trying to read and would make extraordinary progress on and would never fully finish, which was exactly right. Okay, she said to her team, to Jomo and Fatima and Henrik and Priya and all the others on the ship and all the others not yet born and all the 47 iterations of everything that had led to this moment. Let's go home. She descended the ramp from the platform of the oldest machine in existence, and the luminescence of the machine's interior moved with her, patient and attending, all the way to the door. This story was brought to you by HSY Stories. Subscribe to our channel and be the first to experience every new story.